Evening. I'm glad you're here tonight. I appreciate all of you who got in your kayaks and canoes and came out and braved the flooding and everything to be here tonight. We're going to sing a couple of songs, and Brother Gary has our devotional thought tonight before our Bible classes. If you want to, take your songbook and mark number 332. Put a bookmark in 332, Lead Me to Calvary. We'll sing Lead Me to Calvary as the song of invitation in just a moment. After you've put a bookmark in 332, I would invite you to turn to 469. 469, Faith is the Victory. And we will sing 2 verses of this before the devotional thought together. Once you've gotten your songbook to 469, if you would, let's stand together and sing about the victory that faith is. 469.
Then cast along the hills of light, ye Christian soldiers rise, and press the battle there tonight, shall hail the glowing sky. Against the foe in massy hope, let all our strength be heard. Faith is the victory.
If you want to turn in your Bibles to Matthew 25, we're not going to be doing a whole lot of reading, but I will be making some references to it in just a moment. Have you ever had one of those moments where you can say, I spent 3 hours of my life that I'll never get back? I do that just about every day, say 10 hours at work, and I'll never get back. But anyway, part of my job requires that I have to keep a license. I have to keep my respiratory therapy license up to date. And with that being said, many of you can relate, you have to get CEUs, continuing education units. And they make us work for ours. We usually get 1 hour at a time, and it's always on my lunch break, which means I have to sit behind a computer screen, being bored to tears, and click a little button that says OK about every 15 minutes. If I don't do that, I don't get it. And everything they're talking about is right over my head, but I still get the credit. They offered us 3 yesterday. I'm going to record that thing, and when I can't sleep, I'm going to play it back because it will put you to sleep. But I got 3 credits, and that's huge. That's a fourth of what I need for a year's time, and I got it all one day. But most of the time, they talk about these things, topics, and like I said, it goes over my head. But yesterday's topic was a little bit more interesting. It was talking about a nationwide emergency preparation plan. And basically, just in a nutshell, when COVID hit, the health field was kind of overwhelmed. A lot of things they didn't know what to do, and now they're saying that the government needs to have I think, 4,500 respirators in storage in case we have another big need like that. And they need to do this and they need to do that, but they got to make sure that they've got the tubing, and they were going into great details. And I thought, this is on a nationwide basis. What's that got to do with Florence, Alabama? Because they're talking about helping the big cities. Well, I got to thinking, 30 years ago, when the store decided that we were going to become accredited, and we had to do that for insurance reasons, I had to make a notebook called Emergency Preparedness. We've got to be ready. What would we need to be ready for around here? Back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a major ice storm. It's when that song, I Swear, came out. Michael Martin Montgomery or whatever. And I heard that song played 583 times in a 6-hour period down at the drugstore because I had to stay down there overnight. But that was part of our emergency preparedness. We had a bad tornado that hit Tuscaloosa and it hit Phil Campbell. We had to pull out our emergency preparedness manual. We had to see who lived down there and what we needed to do, and we sent trucks. And sad thing was, I couldn't help them. My dad was in the ICU at that time. I was down at the hospital with him. A couple of years ago, I don't know, some of you may remember, I came and taught our Sunday school class one Sunday morning and told you I had to go because we had a tornado that had hit in Florence a couple of days before that, and I was working the emergency preparedness thing. Emergency preparedness is real important, and Joe and Adam and several of the rest of you in here can tell me more about it, tell all of us more about it than I can, but you have to have a plan in place. And it's good when you have that plan in place. A lot of times it comes in handy, but then a lot of times you have to ad-lib that plan. It doesn't work just like it is in the book. They had one lady that was basically reading everything she was talking yesterday on that thing, and I thought, honey child, you wouldn't know what to do when an emergency hit because all you've ever done is read about it. But when people have that experience under their belt, they know how to make changes in plans and how to make it work for you good. You know, as I was thinking about all this, I got to thinking about Matthew chapter 25. We have a couple of parables there that are very familiar to us. He starts off with the parable of the 10 virgins. These 10 virgins were supposed to be prepared for when the bridegroom arrived. How many of those 10 were prepared? If you said 5, you get the prize. So, even though I went to the Florence City school system, if 5 of the 10 were prepared, that lets me know that 12 of the others were unprepared. Is that right? Yeah, I knew I'd have an amen. And so you've got 5 that are prepared and 5 that were not prepared. Now, the ones that were unprepared, what would their excuse be? I have no clue. They had no excuse. They knew the bridegroom was coming, and they didn't make the proper preparations to have the oils to light their lamps. And they start trying to borrow from the ones that are prepared, but they couldn't, give them any of theirs because they would run out too. Then we go on and we read the parable of the talents. And we know that we have 3 men there. 2 of the men were prepared. That means that there was 23 that was not prepared. No, 1. 1 was not prepared, was he? What was his excuse? He was scared. He was afraid that he would lose the talent that was given to him, and the owner would be mad at him. Jesus gives us some pretty awesome parables here that describe that we've got to have our lives prepared. We've got to be prepared. Look down at verse 31. Starting in verse 31, he's going to start talking about when the Lord comes back. There's going to be a judgment. Every one of us will be judged. And he goes in verse 31 and he lets us know that there's going to be some people that are prepared. They're ready. And you know what kind of fascinates me about this is that the ones that were prepared didn't really pay attention to the fact that they were prepared. It was a second nature to them. They were doing the right thing just because that was their lifestyle. And he goes in and he says, you know, there's some of you that have been getting out and helping other people and taking care of the prisoners and giving people water and giving people clothes. And because you were doing it out of the goodness of your heart, I noticed that. But then he goes down in verse 41 and he offers us a glimpse of the people that are unprepared. There was people thinking they were doing the right thing and going about daily life, and all of a sudden they're at the judgment and they're being told, hey, you're lost because you wasn't prepared like you thought you were. People, it basically boils down to the fact tonight that you're either prepared or you're not prepared. It's your choice. You know, God doesn't force us to follow Him, but He gives us the gift that we can follow Him. I'm talking to the cream of the crop tonight, but there may be somebody here tonight that has some needs in your life. Maybe you need some prayers to make sure you're prepared, or maybe there's areas that you need to work on to prepare yourself even more. We may have some here tonight that have not obeyed the gospel, the very first step of being prepared, by putting Christ on in baptism. If we can help you in any way tonight, please make your way to the front as we stand and sing.
King of my life, I crown thee now, I shall the glory be. Lest I forget my form now, lead me to Calvary. Lest I forget Gethsemane, lest I forget
It's good to see everyone tonight at our midweek Bible study. I do hope everybody had a chance to grab an opportunity worksheet on your way in. If you didn't yet have a chance to do that, please grab one of those on your way to class or on your way out this evening. Just a few things I do want to make you mindful of. We do have our Silver Servants We Love You banquet for our 60-plus members. That's this Friday night. If you haven't yet signed up and you'd like to come, please sign up tonight. Our teens will be serving. Lucas, are y'all still looking for people to help out in serving? So if you're a teen, if you can help make that a success this Friday by helping serve, please let Brother Lucas know. And I know that would be greatly appreciated. Dad's group has compassion cards this Sunday. Those are ready tonight for any who want to go ahead and grab those and sign those and bring those back, or you can just sign those Sunday. We do have a home free Haven meal that we have been asked to provide. That'll be Tuesday evening. Also, we'll do breakfast on Wednesday morning as well. If you can help with food, if you can help with serving, if you can give some money towards that effort, please call the office. More details will be announced on Sunday. We do want to express our sympathy to the Lucas Marks family over the passing of his grandmother, Jane Clark. Her funeral will be Friday at Salem. Visitation will be from 10 to 12 o'clock, with the funeral to follow at 12. And then the burial will be at Tri-Cities. So we do want to be mindful of the Marks family during this time. We want to continue to remember all of those on our prayer list, our sick, our shut-ins. I haven't been made aware of anything, any updates from our list, but please be mindful of all of those that are on our list. Does anybody have anything that I may be overlooking tonight? If not, we hope to see you back with us Sunday morning as we have class at 9 and our service at 10. At this time, we'll go ahead and be dismissed to our classes.
All right. Y'all have fun. I'll try. Somebody told me I need to keep y'all in line. I don't know if I can do that or not. You have fun. You're good. So we've been using this book for this Wednesday night series, Favorite Old Testament Texts. And there have been several different guys who have taken different chapters out of the book, and each chapter is written by an alumnus of Heritage Christian University. And so tonight we're going to do a lesson. I mentioned this in the past, if any of you remember, but the alumni that we're going to be learning from tonight is a fellow by the name of Adam Richardson. So, I am a published author. Don't you ever forget it. I'll remind you if you need me to. I'm just kidding. But it is neat. I will tell you, I appreciate very much Heritage Christian University. I've been to 3 different Christian schools in my adult education time, taken classes in multiple different places and done, like Gary talked about tonight, continuing education units, got some, still trying to learn from different things in different places. Heritage has a deep commitment, not just to being a school that trains students and makes money teaching, classes and getting tuition from students and then sends them out. But Heritage is deeply concerned with the church and with how to help the church and give the church tools and resources and things like this. So books that are printed, this kind of material, they put on seminars and workshops. They co-hosted a deacons workshop just last month in conjunction with the Mars Hill Church of Christ, and they put on just all kinds of different opportunities like that. So I'm very grateful that we have them in our neighborhood, in our backyard, so to speak, but I'm especially thankful that they look out for ways to provide resources for us in the church, and I think they do a very good job of that most of the time. So I'm thankful that we have this resource now to use tonight, and I want us to think about a special passage of Scripture that was new to me until just a few years ago. I was teaching some classes over Zoom, doing distance teaching with some folks in South Africa. And these would be people that Rowan and Victoria know. There's a preaching school, a Bible school down there, and they asked me to teach some classes, and I had never really done a full class like that online for a remote place before, and so I said I would be willing to do a month-long class. We meet 3 days a week for 4 weeks. There's grading, there's papers, there's tests. It's a full class, and I'd never done that. And I told them, I said, I've never done that. I said somebody at Heritage recommended, hey, I'll call Adam and see if he's interested in doing it. And I said I'm willing to do it. I've never done it before. But I'm willing to give it a try. And so I thought, them knowing I'm the new guy and that kind of stuff, that they would say, all right, well, let's give him maybe, the book of Acts, or let's have him do a Bible class on Jesus, is good, something real basic and simple. And they said, we need you to do Jeremiah and Lamentations. I said, great, what could possibly go wrong? So I had to go read Jeremiah and Lamentations, because it was not material that I was very familiar with, but I learned an awful lot in that study. And there was one lesson in Jeremiah that really stood out to me. We've talked about the book of Jeremiah and Lamentations here a couple of years ago as well, but I want to think about one of these chapters. One of the things that makes Jeremiah complicated for us is that Jeremiah is not put together in chronological order. Okay, some of it is, but a lot of it is not. A lot of it is out of order. And so he kind of jumps around and does a lot of different things. And so if you just sat down and read Jeremiah from start to finish, it would be really confusing. But if you put the pieces together, it'll tell you who was the king at this chapter, and who was the king at this event, and who was the king when this took place, and all that kind of stuff. And so you can begin to put together a timeline. And one of the things that's really important to know about the book of Jeremiah is it takes place over about 30 or 40 years, like a long period of time. And so it's not just about things are going really good, and then the enemy shows up and they beat the Israelites, and then things go really bad. Okay, it's not linear like that. It doesn't happen, and things are good, the bad guys show up, and then things are bad. Nebuchadnezzar actually comes to the city of Jerusalem 3 separate times during the course of his rule as the king of the Babylonians. And he tries to be nice to the Israelites the first time he comes through. He says, guys, you need to know there's a new king of the hill. You need to understand I'm the boss now. I have defeated the Egyptians. I have defeated the Persians. I am in charge, and you are just a tiny little way station on the road between Egypt and Persia, and I'm just passing through, but don't forget, I have 250,000 people here, and soldiers, and if you don't stay in line, it will be bad. But then he leaves. He leaves some soldiers there. He leaves some people there to let them know, don't forget who's the boss. Make sure you pay your taxes. Make sure you don't talk bad about Nebuchadnezzar. But then he leaves. He says, you can keep doing your thing. You just need to know I'm the boss. And then 2 other times he comes back to Jerusalem because the Israelites seem to have trouble accepting that. They're like, you're not the boss of me. And so as a result, they rebel, and Nebuchadnezzar comes once, and he punishes them. He smacks them around a little bit. He says, look, I'm not kidding. You need to understand, I'm the boss. And then he leaves. But then they do it again. He says, all right, I've had enough of that. And then he comes in and he destroys Jerusalem. And that's the destruction of Jerusalem that we read about. It takes place in about 586 or 587 BC. So 580 years before Jesus. That's when Nebuchadnezzar, for the 3rd time, comes in and just wipes out Jerusalem. He's like, we're not going to keep fighting with you guys. Okay? But there are decades sometimes between these time periods. And so things are good in Jerusalem, and then things are kind of bad in Jerusalem, and then things are good again in Jerusalem, and then things are bad again, and then things get really bad. And just like it is today, right? Things go up and down, things get better, things get worse. Do you ever think that about politics in America? Things go good for a little bit, and then things go in the tank, and then things get a little bit better, and then things go bad? Do people have different opinions about the way things are going with politics in America today? Do we have some disagreements sometimes about that a little bit? Yeah. It was no different in Jeremiah's time period. Okay? Even from the religious perspective, even from a religious standpoint. There were religious people standing up, just like there are today, on both sides of the political spectrum. And some people were saying, Jerusalem can stand up to the Babylonians, and Jerusalem is strong, and God is with us, and we don't need to ever be afraid of any enemy because we are God's chosen people. And then there were other people on this side over here going, no. You need to do what Babylon says. You need to follow their instructions. You need to bow down to them, otherwise it'll be really, really bad. And they're going back and forth. And just like today, how do you know who's right? Sometimes confusing, sometimes conflicting. Even back in the Bible, there were conflicting prophets. Some of the prophets said one thing. Some of the prophets said something different. They didn't agree with one another. And if you're just a commoner, if you're just a regular Joe, and you're trying to figure out, well, who am I supposed to listen to? How do I know who's right and who's wrong? It can be very confusing. And that's what Jeremiah is living through. Jeremiah is trying to stand up and say, guys, here is what the word of the Lord is. I don't think he stood up on the furniture like this because he would get in trouble just like I'm probably going to. But he was trying to get people's attention and say, here is what God says. But the same time that he's saying that, guess what? Guess what's happening over there? Somebody else is doing what? Nuh-uh, God said this. This is what God really says. This is what God means. And so Jeremiah, what's Jeremiah's nickname? He's the what? What kind of prophet was he? The weeping prophet. Because he shouts to the rooftops and no one listens. He says, if you will listen to me, it will be okay. But God has already told me that nobody's going to listen to me. But I still have to do it anyway. And that's Jeremiah's life. One of the things that Jeremiah does to try to get people's attention is go to the temple in Jeremiah chapter 35. So we'll be in Jeremiah chapter 35 tonight. I'm going to try to take you back and show you some other stuff. The temple was a very important thing back then, right? We know that. The temple had been, Solomon had built a temple, and it was one of the 7 wonders of the world, and then it had been destroyed, and then they had, they were trying to take care of it They had added on to it. It was this massive thing. Ezra and Nehemiah will eventually come back, and those will be the books where they'll talk about rebuilding this temple after it's destroyed. But for right now, it's this huge, massive, beautiful building where God lives and where the Holy of Holies is and all this kind of stuff. And the way that the temple is structured is there's this courtyard, and they had a 2-story wall around the courtyard. Okay? And the 2-story wall had rooms in it, had balconies, basically. There were balconies that overlooked this courtyard. And so in Jeremiah chapter 35, Jeremiah goes into the temple, and he goes up to, here's the way you need to think about this room. On Sunday night, what sporting event captured everybody's attention for at least 10 minutes? Super Bowl, right? If you're really, 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 really rich and you have a lot of money and you're popular enough, where can you go into the Superdome and watch the Super Bowl from? A what? A skybox. You get this special box seat, right? Same thing is true if you're really influential and you got a lot of money and you want to go to Broadway and you want to see a Broadway musical. And if you want to spend a lot of money, you can get one of those box seats, right? Every James Bond movie, there's got to be one scene where he goes and sees the supervillain, and he's at the opera sitting up in the balcony, right, in the box seats, right? This special place. There were a couple of rooms like that in Solomon's temple that they used to overlook everything going on around underneath them. And not just anybody could go to that room. It was a special place. You had to have access to it. And Jeremiah goes up and he walks into that room, and there's a table spread out, and he brings a group of, I'm just going to tell you, you may not like this word that I use, but I need you to pay attention. He brings a group of refugees up into that room. Refugees is a hot topic in America right now, isn't it? People who are in our country, who've run away from their own country, whether they're here legally or illegally, or who shipped them in, or who bused them where, or all these kinds of questions and problems that we have. But there was a group of refugees in Jerusalem, and they were camped outside the temple. That's just where they had set up their homeless shelter. That's where their lean-tos were set up. And they looked way different than everybody else in Jerusalem. The only way I know how to describe this scene to you is if you've been have you been to Lawrenceburg, Tennessee? Who lives up there in Lawrenceburg? That's where the Amish, right? The Mennonite community, right? And are they a little different than us? They're a little different than us, right? If you go into a restaurant up there, can you pick them out pretty easily from everybody else? Their clothing separates them, right? The way that they cut their hair, the things that they wear on their body, the transportation that they use, all of that stuff sets them apart. And you can look at them right off the bat and say, they don't really fit in. Well, that's what this group of refugees was as well. They looked different. They acted different. They talked different than everybody else around them. An instant glance, you knew they did not belong. Okay? And Jeremiah takes this group of people up into this upper balcony room. I mean, it would be like me getting to just walk right into the skybox at the Super Bowl and get a seat there. I do not belong. And so I cannot imagine the looks on their faces, the surprise, all this stuff. And while they're there, and again, the balcony is open. The courtyard is full of people. And in front of everybody, Jeremiah has invited them to a gathering. And there's a table there. And he's like, guys, come on in, have a seat, make yourself comfortable. And he fixes them a glass of what? Do you remember, or have you read? Have you cheated? A cup of wine. Come on, sit down, prop your feet up, take it easy. I'm glad to be able to host you. I hope you're having a good time. I want to just show you the temple a little bit. Here, have a glass of wine. And what do? they declined. They said, no, thank you. Now, when you go to your grandmama's house and she offers you food, what had you better do? You better eat it. Have you noticed that? Maybe that's not as true now as it was when I was a kid, but when I went to the grandparents' house, why don't you go there in the kitchen and get you something to eat? You'd already had 3 meals. My goodness gracious, I'm fit to bust. But she's not going to stop saying, go in there and get you something to drink, or you want some of this? I just made this pie yesterday. Surely you want a piece of this. And until it's hospitality. You don't turn down hospitality. And in that culture, I'm playing it light and easy. In that culture, you did not turn down hospitality. It was offensive. And so they had already accepted an invitation to come into this room. They had already said, we will come to your little gathering. They are there in front of everybody. Have you ever heard the term peer pressure before? In front of literally God and everybody. Isn't that the way some people say it sometimes? But this time it's true. They are in the temple, and they are surrounded by all these Israelites who have no problem whatsoever drinking wine. They drink wine every day with every meal. Maybe not breakfast, but possibly. And when they are offered wine to drink, they say, we can't do that. Thanks, but no thanks. Now, why? What's the big deal? Why does that matter? What is going on? Does it seem like a little bit of a strange situation? I mean, until you understand some context here, it doesn't really make sense as to why Jeremiah does this. Jeremiah then will turn to the people who have been watching this whole thing, and he says, now, isn't it funny how these Rechabites honor their father and the vow that they made to their father, and you guys can't keep the vows that you made to God, your father. He says, I'm disappointed in y'all. He doesn't have any problems with the Rechabites, this group of refugees. And again, we're going to try to trace that for just a minute, where these Rechabites came from. But they are outlanders. They are foreigners. They do not belong. They are Gentile nomads. And they have invaded Jerusalem. They have just come across the border without asking for permission. Just telling you, that's what's happening in Jeremiah 35. And Jeremiah says, these guys are better than y'all. Now, I'm just going to push a button just to make you think. If one of those buses that was full of illegal immigrants came driving through Florence, Alabama, and stopped somewhere around here, and somebody pointed at that bus full of illegal immigrants and said, turns out those people are better than y'all. How would we take that message? Probably wouldn't go over well, would it? Probably wouldn't go over very well. But that's what Jeremiah does. Maybe this is why people didn't listen to Jeremiah very much. Because he said stuff they didn't want to hear. I couldn't help thinking about that when Gary was doing his devotional tonight, though, in Matthew chapter 25. The king will say to those on his right hand, come into the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, because you did what? You took care of people. What kind of people? As often as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Whether they're being used as political pawns or not, they're still human beings with souls, and sometimes we have to not lose sight of that fact. And that's kind of where Jeremiah is at with these Rechabites. These Rechabites have been living out in the deserts and in the wilderness for hundreds of years, one generation after the other. And they have taken vows that make them look weird to everybody else, right? Just like we talked about, we've got people that, they don't have electricity, and they don't ride in automobiles, and they don't wear clothes that have been manufactured, certain ways, and all those kinds of things. The Rechabites said, well, we're not going to build houses and live in a located house. We're going to wander forever. And we're not going to plant vineyards. And we're not going to plant crops. We're going to have to make our living a different way than that. And we're never going to drink wine. And that, by the way, that's not just alcohol. No wine, period. Grape juice is in that category. They didn't drink anything that came from the vine. Now, did God tell them that they needed to make those covenants? Did God require those? Was that part of God's law somewhere? It was not. It was not. Rechabites comes from the word Rechab, and that's a guy's name. So who are the Rechabites? Who were these? He said, we made a promise to our father, and by father he means forefather. We made a promise to our forefathers that we would never drink wine. And so even though he's dead and gone, and even though it's been countless generations and nobody remembers him, we still honor that covenant, and we will not break that vow that we made to our forefather. Who is this guy? Why do they feel so strongly about that they're willing to keep this covenant in Jeremiah chapter 35? If you turn, I'm going to show you some verses really quick. If you turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 2. So I'm going to show you the Rechabites and the other name that they are known by. And you'll actually be kind of surprised. Maybe you won't be. Maybe you know more about this than I do. But until I went looking at it, I didn't have a clue. 1 Chronicles chapter 2. We get our first kind of discussion of the Rechabites. In chapter 2 and verse 54, it talks about Salma. And Salma had descendants in Bethlehem, the Nethaphalites, Atroth Beth Joab, and half of the Mahathites, the Zorites, and the families of the scribes who lived in Jabez, the Tirathites, the Shimeathites, the Succothites. These are the Kenites who came from Hamath, the father of Rechab's family. So you see Rechab there. That's really all I need you to get, right? Because none of the rest of that makes any sense, and we'd have to do a whole lot bigger family tree to get this. But you need to see that the Rechabites came from Hamath. And what group was Hamath from? The man Hamath came from what group of people? Do you see it there? These are the what? The Kenites. That's right. The Kenites. Now, I don't know if the word Kenite means anything to you. That's totally fine if it doesn't. But the Kenites are linked to this man Hamath, who was known as a Kenite or a Kenite. And this group of Kenites, you need to turn to Genesis chapter 15. Genesis chapter 15. This is going all the way back to the time of Abraham. This is even before Abraham. The first time we see the Kenites is in Genesis chapter 15, verse 19. Genesis 15, in verse 18, it says, on that day God made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring, from the brook of Egypt, the great river, to the Euphrates River. And this land is the land that belongs to, and who does it belong to right then? What's the first name in that list in verse 19? There's the Kenites. You see them? So these are Gentiles. These are not Jewish people at all. The Kenites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites and the Hethites and the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. All right, all that stuff. So before Abraham gets to the land of Canaan, there are Kenites living there. And Abraham dwells among the Kenites, and Abraham's son Isaac dwells among the Kenites, and Isaac's son Jacob dwells among the Kenites. And then when Jacob's 12 sons grow up, what happens in the land of Canaan? There's a big what? There's a big famine. And the only reason that anybody survives the big famine is because who had already been sent down to where to get ready? Joseph is where? In Egypt. Now his brothers, we've been studying this, his brothers did that to him out of malice and hatred, and they thought they were getting rid of him, but God meant it for good. God took that turn of events and we used it to save everybody. And so at the end of Genesis, Jacob and his sons and their family and all of Abraham's descendants do what? They go to Egypt. They leave. How long are they in Egypt? 400 years. Everybody that knew anything about the land of Canaan dies. Gone. They don't exist anymore. But the land of Canaan that whole time has just been doing its thing. And then in Exodus chapter 1, we read about a guy named what? Who's the hero of Exodus? Moses. Moses, after he kills an Egyptian, gets up and runs away. And I love the language in Exodus as he sits down at a well and he just waits. He doesn't have a clue what to do. He's just at the mercy of fate. But this cute little girl named Zipporah shows up. And he helps her water her animals and get water for her. And she says, thank you. And then she leaves him there at the well and she goes home. And she's like, Dad, you're not going to believe it, but some guy was really nice to us down at the well. And Dad says what? Why'd you leave him at the well? Bring that boy home. And so he goes. Now, I say boy, he's 40 years old, so he's just a little younger than me. But back then, that's a spry little kid. So Moses goes home to this guy's house. Numbers chapter 10. So we're counting up the years. Numbers chapter 10. And in Moses chapter 10, Moses is getting ready to go to the promised land. They're ready to hike through the wilderness. But he's a little nervous. And so, I'm reading in Numbers chapter 10, verse 29. Moses said to Hobab, descendant of Ruel the Midianite, and Moses' relative by marriage, we are setting out for the place the Lord promised I will give to you. Come with us, and we will treat you well, for the Lord has promised good things to Israel. Hobab replied, I don't want to go. Instead, I will go to my own land and my relatives. Moses said, please don't leave us. You know where we should camp in the wilderness. You can serve as our eyes. And if you come with us, whatever good the Lord does for us, we will do for you. Okay? This guy, Hobab. You probably don't know him as Hobab. He's got a couple of different names. He's related to Moses. Anybody want to take a stab at who this Hobab guy is? His name is Jethro. Jethro. Turn to Judges chapter 1. Joshua, Judges. Judges chapter 1 and Judges chapter 4. In Judges chapter 1 and verse 16, we get another piece of this little puzzle. Judges 1 verse 16. The descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, had gone up with the men of Judah from the city of palms to the wilderness of Judah, which was in the Negev of Arad, and they were living among the people. So there's the Kenites again, and the Kenites happen to be, Moses' father-in-law is a Kenite. In Judges chapter 4, in verse 11, Heber, the Kenite, had moved away from the Kenites, the sons of Hobab, Moses' father-in-law, and pitched his tent beside the oak tree of Zaanannim, which was near Kadesh. So Hobab was, maybe it was the Kenite name or something else, but lots of people had different names that they went by back then. This is nothing new. Hobab was the name for Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, who was himself a Kenite, going all the way back to Genesis chapter 15. His descendants, he is one of the descendants of the people that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob interacted with 400 years before. And Jethro was a priest of God. Huh? Just like Melchizedek. There are people in the land of Canaan. Let me be more specific. There are Gentiles in the land of Canaan who know about Yahweh, who know about the one true God. How would they know about the one true God? How would Jethro and Melchizedek and Balaam, by the way, Balaam also knows, even though eventually he goes the wrong direction. How do these people know about the one true God? There's lots of theories. One of them is that Abraham introduces them. Abraham talks about the God that told me to get up from my land and leave Ur of the Chaldees and come all the way here. And they're like, what kind of a guy would follow that? That must be some kind of God. But they know about God. Even though the Israelites are slaving away in Egypt, they pass on the information about God for 400 years. They don't know anything about Him. They don't know really much. But when Moses comes to this well, maybe it's not a coincidence that the girl who shows up just happens to be the daughter of the priest of God, who is a Kenite. And later on, one of the Kenites will be named Rechab. And so they will call them Rechabites. You with me? You seeing the connections and the links? Now, it still doesn't mean anything. I understand that. But all the way in Jeremiah chapter 35, as he talks to these people, he is talking to the descendants of Moses' father-in-law from before the time of the Exodus. They have a direct link, a direct connection. Now, for the sake of time, I got to just skip over the next really cool link. But his name is Jehu and Jonadab. All right? Jehu is the guy responsible for killing King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Jehu is the Israelite, or excuse me, the Jew responsible for killing Ahab and Jezebel. And when he does that, there is a guy riding shotgun in the chariot with him. Almost literally. Now, he didn't have a shotgun, but he was riding with him into battle. And his name was Jonadab or Jehonadab. That is the Jonadab. Turn back to Jeremiah 35 so we can bring the whole lesson home. In Jeremiah 35, here's what the Rechabites said in verse 8. We have obeyed Jonadab, son of our ancestor Rechab, in all he commanded us. We haven't drunk wine our whole life. We, our wives, our sons, or our daughters. We have not built houses to live in, do not have vineyards, fields, or seed. But we have lived in tents and obeyed and done everything our ancestor Jonadab commanded us. But when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon marched into the land, we said, we need to go to Jerusalem to get away from the Chaldean and our Aramean armies. So we have been living in Jerusalem. You see, what they did was they traveled through the wilderness with Moses and the Israelites until they came to the land of Canaan. And what happened the first time the Israelites came to the land of Canaan? Did they march right in and take the land? You know the story. They made a mistake. And what did that mistake cost them? 40 years. Everybody over 20 years old dies in that wilderness. Who sticks with them for 40 years? The Kenites. Now, does the Bible bother to tell us that? Because we think the Bible's about the Jews. We focus on the story of the Jews. Are the Jews the only people that matter? They are not. It is certainly the story about the Jews, don't get me wrong, but God was concerned about everybody back then. And the Kenites stuck around. They kept their vow to Moses, and they wandered for 40 years with the Israelites. And then they get into the Promised Land, and they continue to wander around in the Promised Land. They don't have a city. They don't get cities of refuge. They don't get a tribe of a land allotment like Naphtali and Manasseh and Judah and all the. They're just wandering. They're in the background of the whole Old Testament, but they're there. And the whole time, they are being faithful to God. What are the rest of the Canaanites doing? Who do the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites worship? Baal and Asherah and all these other pagan gods and goddesses. Not the Kenites, not the Rechabites. And probably, now this is where Adam's just talking about Adam right now. But as I've studied this, Jonadab, after Ahab and Jezebel get killed, right? Tensions are pretty high between Israel and Judah, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, because the southern kingdom just killed the northern kingdom's, king and queen. Doesn't usually go over very well, if you can believe it. It's possible Jonadab can tell that things are about to get really ugly. And Jonadab is the one who tells his family, look guys, we're going to change our tactics a little bit. We are going to keep wandering. We are not going to drink wine. We are going to be alert. We're not going to get stuck in a city. We're going to live differently than everybody else around us. And that makes us look weird. But we're going to do it anyway. Now, just a random thought. If somehow, and this is a worst case scenario, but what if some bad foreign country or bad foreign agency figured out a way to attack America in such a way that it knocked our power grid out 100%? TVA couldn't work anymore. The nuclear plants didn't work anymore. The networks were overloaded. The grids went down. We lost all electricity. Would that be good or bad? It's going to be bad. What? But it will be okay for the Mennonites. It will be okay for the Mennonites. Now, I'm not saying we need to, convert to Mennonitisms or whatever, but they have made a conscious decision to live differently than the rest of the world, the rest of America and the rest of their neighbors. And if we suddenly lose all of our sense of normalcy, the estimates of the people who will die, just like what Gary was talking about with this emergency preparation stuff, right? If a hospital has no more power, what happens to all the people on life support? They will die because they have to have electricity to live. How many other people are so dependent upon electricity that if electricity goes away, they will die? And so civilization is going to have a really rough time if that were to ever happen. But not for the Mennonites. Do the Mennonites know how to fix their buggy if it breaks down? They do. Do the Mennonites know how to build a house without power tools? They do. Do the Mennonites know how to get water out of a well without using electricity? They do. And so they might be better prepared for a catastrophe than most of us. And that's just a fair assessment. Jonadab may have been the biblical version of a prepper.